Wow. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. What an impressive stage. I'm so excited. And what a great audience. I'd like to start by thanking the Qt team by giving me the most challenging spot of the day, right after lunch, as the food kicks in, right? But of course, the topic we're talking about has a caffeine effect for some, as nicely introduced. I want to talk a little bit about why the traditional focus, traditional thinking around cybersecurity does not really cut it anymore, and why, when we say cyber resilience, we actually emphasize and prioritize different capabilities in organizations. I'm Öykü Isik. I'm a professor of digital strategy and cybersecurity at IMD Business School in Switzerland. We do exclusively executive education. So every day, my conversations are with senior business decision makers, with leaders on AI risk landscape as well as cybersecurity risk landscape. My journey has taken me from Istanbul, where I was born and raised, to US, to Belgium, and to Switzerland for now. If I'm not teaching or doing research on these super exciting topics, I'm dealing with my 11-year-old at home or two other four-legged children that you see here on the screen. And indeed, every day the conversation that I have is around the increasing risk that comes with cybersecurity, right? It's always interesting to see some statistics, and I wanted to share this with you. Did you know that only in Q3 of 2024, an average organization has experienced a 75% surge in the cyber attacks that they have experienced? 75% surge. Have any of you experienced a cyber attack? Or been victim of a data breach? Let me put it that way. How about your organizations? Do you know? Some hands are going up. More and more of these organizations not only reporting attacks, right? Everybody gets attacked. That's not really interesting anymore. But when some of those attacks turns into successful breaches, and they may even later on turn into incidents and cyber crisis, right? We've seen several of those over the last 2 years. Actually, some of the most damaging financially and from a personal perspective, some of the most damaging attacks did happen in the past 2 or 3 years. I've just picked 3 of those, right? You may remember the Ticketmaster breach last summer. There were a lot of finger pointing, and now in hindsight, we know that it was not actually Ticketmaster, but their cloud service provider, Snowflake, that was breached. And Ticketmaster was only one of the hundreds of companies that got breached because of that vulnerability in the Snowflake, and highlighting the importance of supply chain attacks that we see increasing more and more. Or what happened in Indonesia, that the Ministry of IT and Telecommunications got breached, 1.3 billion individuals' personal data was leaked. The citizens were so angry that they actually sided up with the hacker. They were so angry against the incompetence of the government, even though they were going for digitalization, that they were not really prioritizing cybersecurity. We also saw National Public Data, which is a background check and data brokerage firm that got breached just a couple of months ago and managed the breach in such unprofessionally that they recently filed for bankruptcy, right? Because they were not really taking accountability, they were not being transparent in handling and taking responsibility of this, and now they have filed for bankruptcy. Just 3 examples of what we have seen over the last 2 years, but maybe the most damaging ones, and I'm sure you have heard of this, is the increasing risk that comes with ransomware. Just one recent example from the United States, when one small payment vendor got breached and was crippled because of ransomware, the whole healthcare ecosystem got impacted for months because nobody could transfer their payments, patients couldn't get their medication, doctors couldn't get paid, and etc. And in hindsight, 100 million got impacted. Change Healthcare, by the way, did pay the ransom to the hackers, but the hackers released the personal data of patients anyways, right? So this is yet another double hit. But not every attack we see are financially motivated. Not at all. You see, now we know the war in Russia-Ukraine started actually on digital grounds first, right? or how I had the opportunity just a couple of weeks ago listen to a gentleman from the agency in Japan who oversees the security of underwater, under-ocean cables. And he was telling us that how there is at least one event weekly that goes into, some of them seemingly, non-malicious, but some malicious, into sabotaging or having access to these undersea cables that enable our connectivity. Of course, as a result, this is now on top of the risk agenda of everyone. Maybe you follow the World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report. They publish this every year. They talk to thousands of senior decision makers, public companies, private companies, non-profits. And what we have been seeing over the last few years is those purple ones you see, all digital-related risks, have been climbing up the risk ladder slowly over the last few years, now led by misinformation and disinformation, as you see here. But it's very important. I mean, if you want to increase the resilience, right, we need to understand the root cause behind some of these things, because otherwise, this is what we see from most organizations today. We can only react to these attacks. How can we be a bit more proactive? I work very closely with the World Economic Forum on their Global Future Council on Cybersecurity, and we did some research recently that led into these 6 main themes that we believe significantly contribute to why we talk about this changing threat landscape. The examples I just gave does highlight geopolitical tension, the increasing sophistication of cybercrime, the increasing risk that comes with supply chain interdependencies. But we also, of course, have this rush to not just AI, but emerging technologies, and of course, that increases the uncertainty that comes with the systems that we're building, right? Even though the demand to digitalization is increasing, the number of people who wants to study STEM is decreasing. Did you know that? Even more for cybersecurity. Less and less people are actually interested in enrolling in cybersecurity degree programs and STEM degrees. So that is a bottleneck that is about to hit our way real soon. And of course, then there comes the regulatory requirements, trying to manage all this risk in an effort to create a governance approach to this changing and fast-changing landscape. But the biggest driver of all this is, of course, connectedness, right? That also brings us to the challenging risk of combination between physical and digital security. Just to make my case, one example straight out of a Hollywood movie, a casino did get hacked a couple of years ago through a fish tank thermometer. So this is an IoT-connected device, so the owners can auto-feed the fish and see the temperature and etc. And the hackers observed the vulnerability and exploited this vulnerability to get a foothold in the network, and then found their way into a high-value individuals database, the highest bidders in that casino, and they were, siphoning out the personal data of these individuals in this incident. Another one, just from January this year, is what Subaru had experienced, along with many other digital connected car manufacturers, actually. In this case, thankfully, it was the white hat hackers, a group of researchers who figured out a vulnerability in an employee website that is meant to be only open internally in the Subaru network. They found and exploited a vulnerability there, and as a result, they were able to start and stop the cars on will and download the complete location database of one car, within the year. So goodbye privacy for the users in this case. We are seeing this potential weaponization, right, of digital connectedness against individuals. But it's not just against individuals, like in the case of Subaru, against your organizations, but we've seen this before, right? This weaponization of digital connectedness against nations. There's a very good, if you haven't seen, there's a very good documentary about Stuxnet, right? Which is referred to as the world's first digital weapon, where not one, not two, but 4 zero-day vulnerabilities were put together. What is a zero-day vulnerability? Even the vendor is not aware. It has been 0 days since the vendor has been informed of a vulnerability in their system. So there were 4 in this one, specifically targeting one very specific version of a Siemens centrifuge that was only being used in the Iranian nuclear enrichment facility. Right? But we're talking about a nuclear plant. It was not connected to internet. How did this thing get in? On a flash drive, carried by someone, either knowingly or unknowingly, we just don't know, right? Found this way in. So designing these kind of software, digitally enabled weapons is not just about the software part, but also finding its way, designing its way into these organizations. You may remember, because this pathway may happen through manipulating software, but it may also happen through manipulating hardware. This is what we observed a couple of months ago when hundreds of pagers exploded in Lebanon, killing civilians as well as Hezbollah agents, right? So we now know in hindsight that there was explosives embedded in the hardware. So somewhere in between this supply chain of manufacturing pagers and walkie-talkies, something happened, right? How many times did this device change hands? There's a chip manufacturer involved, there's design side, there's firmware, there's packaging, warehouses, how many warehouses involved? How much visibility do we have into the supply chains that our products, software and hardware, are passing through? Even the coffee you're drinking, one of the most simplest supply chains out there, has a minimum of 10 handovers from bean to cup, right? At least 10 steps. How many handovers are there when it comes to a walkie-talkie? How many handovers are there when it comes to your software applications, right? Do you have visibility of the different vendors and partners that you're working with, right? Do you have visibility of their software security practices? Today, unfortunately, organizations, not just software, but in general, when it comes to supply chain visibility, at best, organizations have transparency or a perspective into their first-tier partners. Beyond second tier, it's a mystery for most organizations, right? The same for supply chain vendors. And it's not just also about trustworthy vendors, right? I mean, you can have very trustworthy vendors. Before 2020, SolarWinds was a very well-trusted software vendor. They were providing security applications, right? But we now, again in hindsight, only know that threat actors embedded malicious code into the update server of SolarWinds. So every time an update was released, the thousands of customers SolarWinds had trusted that update and implemented. Along with that came a malicious software, and now the first thing SolarWinds did was to remove the list of customers they had from their website when this breach got public, because this included Microsoft, White House, and all the other federal agencies, in this case, in Europe. So we have such increasing complexities. The once clear gap between physical security and cybersecurity is blurring. We have significant supply chain interdependencies that are making things more complicated. We have an increasing interest and lowering barriers to the market of cybercrime. And on the other hand, we have reducing transparency as well as reducing demand to working towards these things. And this is where I would like to bring in the role of regulations, right? CRA, of Cyber Resilience Act, that we'll also learn a little bit about, is a new regulation applied to all the products that are put in the European market that intends to solve some of these issues that the breaches I just shared were caused by. It basically, if I have to summarize it in one word, is collaborative responsibility. This regulation basically tells that you're a, I don't know, refrigerator manufacturer, home appliance manufacturer, and if you have connected capability in your home appliances, it is actually your responsibility to make sure that it is cyber secure. So you cannot just turn a blind eye and say, oh, I have a software vendor that takes care of for me. No, it's actually you will be found liable if there's a breach because of the software vulnerability that resides in your home appliance. So the intention is to ensure that products with digital elements have fewer vulnerabilities. The expectation is to be more proactive from organization in figuring these things out. The expectation is for organizations to be more transparent in communicating about the vulnerabilities and how and what they do to secure their products. And of course, there's also a big incident handling and incident management side that comes with this as well. And this is exactly why we do talk about, let me take a step back and say, not just CRA, but in general, we are talking about switching from a more traditional cybersecurity mindset to a cyber resilience mindset. I really like this visual. I think it captures the essence really greatly, because what does traditional cybersecurity focus on typically? Prevention and protection. But resilience implies saying that, sure, they are important, but you must as much invest in detection, response, and recovery capabilities. Again, traditional cybersecurity is more about, let me build high enough walls so that the bad guys cannot come in. But with all the examples that I've shown, also I think hopefully it's clear that maybe there's a little bit of swimming against the current. Maybe I should start thinking about the fact that I will eventually experience something like this, but it's in my power to be as prepared as I can so that the damage is minimized, right? Any initiative you will take for this matter is not just about enabling 100% cybersecurity. We always say there is no 100% cybersecurity, but with preparation, we can be resilient enough to shrink the V you see in this visualization, or shrink the circle, right? I can be prepared, so I'm very quick in detecting if there's a malicious actor in my network, and I can absorb that incident and quickly recover and get back up on my feet. This is the hard-off concept of resilience. Of course, I'm going to continue investing in protection capabilities, but I must also prepare for failure. Most organizations think that resilience is about backups. Oh yes, we have backups. We have some redundant systems. We can back up. But actually, it's more about being proactive in testing those backups, being proactive with threat intelligence, and being proactive in finding those vulnerabilities. And this is also the mindset behind the Cyber Resilience Act that we just introduced. Cyber Resilience Act has been in the works since 2019 or so, but finally in 2024 it has been formally adopted. And actually this year, from the beginning of this year, there are some obligations in enforcement for the manufacturers who put these digitally enabled products in the European market. This basically says that if you know of any exploited vulnerability that exists in your product, you have to let the authorities know. ENISA is the European Cybersecurity Agency, but depending on the country, you also have a data protection agency that also oversees GDPR, for instance. So there are different authorities you will have to inform in case you realize an exploited vulnerability, right? So a known issue. Before that, this didn't really exist. You know, GDPR is all about personal data, so cybersecurity only comes in if personal data has been breached, right? So that's when the information obligation was there. But with CRA, it basically is not just about personal data leak. If you have a vulnerable product, then you have to let the authorities know. As of next year, as of 2026, CRA will have other enforced expectations that also comes with, conformity assessments, or comes with incident response processes and incident response communication expectations as well. So what are some of these obligations for organizations that put software products, for instance, in the market, right? Or that put digitally enabled hardware in the market? The authorities say you have to show us that you're doing a good enough job in embedding cybersecurity thinking from the moment of planning of a product, design, development, production, delivery, and the maintenance of the product. So even if you sell your product to a customer, you're still responsible for maintaining the cybersecurity expectations around that product. And not only do this, but you also have to have a documentation trail, right? You have to document, you have to tell us what are the steps you've been taking, what did you do to ensure the security of the product. As we discussed, you have to report these vulnerabilities, and if you experience any incidents, and you have to, of course, make sure that you are handling vulnerabilities effectively. So there's a servicing element that comes with this. I've been talking with the executive management team of a car parts manufacturer, and they are also enabling the parts they are manufacturing digitally. They are enabling with sensors. There's an app that they are using. There's, of course, a smart system in the car, and etc. And they were completely faced with a process change challenge. They say, you know, we are mechanical engineers. We are machinery engineers. We know the process of manufacturing, but suddenly it's not about manufacturing a car part, but it's also dealing with the software that comes with it, right, and enabled digitally, the capability enabling software applications. Suddenly, I have to oversee not just the hardware manufacturing process, but the software development process. It's not necessarily the same thing. One approach that works for one does not necessarily work for the other. So what does it mean for me as an engineer? As I'm not a software developer, I don't know what this implies. What do I do? How do I change? How do I govern? How do I manage my organization? Because I'm not only producing hardware anymore. So that kind of changing this, what is going to be pushed by these new regulatory directives. The other thing that is significant that comes with CRA, other than these basic expectations of, you know, cybersecurity is now your responsibility as well, is how I how do I respond in the case of an actively exploited vulnerability. If I realize that some organizations or individuals experience a data breach because of a vulnerability in my product, then I have to, the moment I learn about this, I have 24 hours to inform the NIS2 as well as the relevant cybersecurity incident response team within my country, within my jurisdiction, right? And within the 72 hours, a second notification providing more. Again, this is significantly different from other regulations that we had. So now there's a lot of expectation in terms of details being provided to not just customers, but also to regulators. And finally, when I solve the problem, hopefully there's a patch released. 2 weeks after that, I go back with a full report saying that this is what happened, this is why it happened, and this is how I solved this problem. So pure transparency and loss of detail is what's being expected from organizations with CRA. You may have also heard about NIS2, which is another directive, rather new in Europe. There's a lot of overlap between the two. I just wanted to very briefly tell you that these are actually two different yet very complementary directives. NIS2 is all about cyber risk management and organizational security posture. They focus on certain industries, especially for, let's say, critical infrastructure services, utilities, for instance. They want to make sure that those organizations are especially resilient to cyber attacks. They want to make sure that those critical infrastructure managers know how to deal with incidents. Very much a sector and incident handling maturity focus. But Cyber Resilience Act focuses on security by design and default, and is very much of a product focus rather than a system focus. This is why two of them are not very different. You see the expectations are very much aligned, but two are very complementary when it comes to coverage from a cybersecurity responsibility perspective. You may wonder, how will this actually help us become more resilient? What is the expected change that such enforcement may bring? I think we can look into one recent, very also damaging breach. When you heard of MOVEit cyber attacks, I'm sure it's been dubbed as the biggest data theft of 2023. We're talking about the MOVEit vulnerability that was exploited through an SQL injection, right? And was what was the name of the organization here? I think it was Progress Software that basically enables a file transfer service. And this file transfer service is already embedded in several critical infrastructure and several critical workflows in many organizations. A ransomware group, CLOP is the name of a ransomware group that figured this out. and exploited within a very short time frame and started exploiting this vulnerability, and more than 2,000 organizations were impacted as a result of this. Because this MOVEit, this file transfer software, was embedded in so many systems, the attack had a massive blast radius, and it was, again, another example of supply chain compromise. How much money do you think Klopp made out of this? Basically, using this vulnerability, they embedded ransomware into over 2,000 organizations. It is estimated that they have made somewhere between $75 million to $100 million. Now, of course, we're still talking about SQL injections, right? It's one of the oldest cyber attacks that we have been studying out there. So even then, this may not have been completely preventable, right? But I think when you look at what the CRA expects from organizations, this is a fair assessment to say that if there was a security by design and default expectation, the likelihood that such threats may have been caught beforehand. Now, Progress Software was quite fast in technically reacting to this. They released a patch in 3 days, on average, which is a good number in cybersecurity. But they have not been great in terms of communicating and dealing with the aftermath of the breach. They still have over 100 lawsuits in their hands that they are dealing with because of this. If there had been vulnerability management mandated back then, I think there would have been a process to identify, document, and even report these vulnerabilities. So that would also increase the likelihood of figuring and fixing this before the threat actors exploited this. Now, conformity assessment comes with critical software with CRA. And with being embedded into many organizations, Progress Software would have been listed as a high-risk software application, and they would have gone through a conformity assessment by a third party, which literally comes and does a security check and penetration testing and etc. to ensure that no known vulnerabilities exist in your system. That would have definitely significantly reduced the risk of non-fixed vulnerabilities in the software. And of course, communication and expectation of transparency, had it been there, already being enforced, I'm sure Progress Software would have been much better in communicating and dealing with the aftermath of the incident. So what does this mean for you, right? Just one example of a breach, a major breach caused by a vulnerability in a software application. Allow me to start wrapping up by highlighting some of the implications for software development community. And I came across this very interesting survey, the State of the Developer-Driven Security. That was really interesting to see the reactions of. Now, this was a global survey conducted a few years ago, and the responses came from all over the world, over 1,000 responses from software developers and their management teams. One of the questions asked, do you think that you leave vulnerabilities in your code? And almost half actually accepted that, yes, I probably do, and you do see some, almost 20% says that depending on the project, it may or it may not, right? There's a very large percentage of acceptance around the challenges and the vulnerability in the code. Why does that happen? Why do these vulnerabilities exist in the code? And the responses are pretty equally distributed, making me think that there's more than one reason why software developers think about it that way. First of all, we prioritize functionality over security. So it's not in my KPIs, right? I have deadlines that I have to meet, and I have to make sure that this thing that I'm developing actually functions, and security always comes as an afterthought. Or, other than the deadline, maybe it's about knowing. Maybe we may not know what makes our code vulnerable. Maybe I have a hunch about this, but I may not necessarily know how to assess and where to look and etc. Maybe I don't have a process in place in my organization that actually tells me, here are the steps that you need to go through. This is what you need to do to be able to assess this. There are many reasons, and we lack the knowledge to address. What if I find a vulnerability? I don't know what I need to do, even if I figure this out. Again, coming back to the lack of a standard process in the organization to deal with these kind of challenges. So then let's talk about sharing that knowledge, right? Let's talk about training about secure design. And you see they were asked about, do you have training on this topic? What does it mean to go through secure development? Half of them said, we definitely need significant training. And then the 40% said, yes, we need at least some training. So you see this clear recognition of communication and training on this topic as well, meaning that if we have a standard process and procedures that we know how to go about this, then the results will be significantly better. What are the blockages, right? What are your top impediments when it comes to pushing out secure code? And you see again that there's not enough time to integrate secure coding earlier. Today, most of the time, we see the similar approach in AI progress today as well. Not only cybersecurity, but we do see several ethical and privacy and security-related concerns in AI, and the same discussions are going around in the AI circles as well, that we do focus on pushing the product out, and only in hindsight and when we learn about a problem, we turn back and patch the vulnerabilities or work on the guardrails in the case of AI, or try to secure the softwares that we're working on. Lack of a cohesive plan, lack of an approach to implement secure coding, and lack of prioritization from the top team. Clearly, when we talk about security by design principles, the first thing you'll hear is shift the responsibility to the left, right? Start building in security from earlier in the phase. But of course, this is not going to happen by itself if there is no clear KPIs that relates to you, that comes from management, that involves security thinking as well. So this is definitely a communication challenge as well as a co-creation effort in the organizations if there is no expectation around secure code delivery in the organization already. But this also means a lot of collaboration, of course. Somebody has to be there translating what CRA means when it comes to your product, right? What is the software code that you are working on is embedded where? So your legal team is your best friend in this case, translating this for you, or so your security team is your best friend for collaboration in terms of making sure this shifting to left can happen, that security by design principles can be applied as early as possible. It is, I think, very nice and encouraging to see that almost half of developers who responded to the survey saying that every member of my team should be held responsible. I am ultimately responsible for my own code, but this is a shared responsibility. And I think it's not just within the developer team, but also especially involving the management is where the shared responsibility must lay. And you see on the other side, from a management perspective, there are also other obstacles that needs to be resolved. And that, again, we're back to the role of process design in the organization, right? Lack of a cohesive plan or approach to implementing secure coding. What are the expectations? Very transparently laying these expectations out and setting KPIs is the first step forward in making this embedded in the organization. So it's not only about shifting to software development as well, but changing what you're being measured on is a big part of this change in the organizations too. I think this leads to the most important side of this. Your organizations will be working towards, if not already working towards, being compliant with CRA, right? And CRA basically means we expect you to embed security thinking from design, and we expect you to have a proper process when it comes to dealing with vulnerabilities. And if you experience a cyber breach because of that vulnerability, you have to have proper processes for incident management and handling and communication as well. So many organizations do have some processes already in place, but what they don't do is proactively testing these processes. Not many organizations take their top management team from their day-to-day job and put them in a room to run a tabletop exercise. That's still a luxury for many organizations, right? Just because you have a process on a piece of paper somewhere doesn't mean it will work. We're really pushing organizations to even test recovery from their backups. In many ransomware incidents, we actually saw that organizations were prepared. They had a process, they had a backup, but they failed during the recovery process from their backup. So there's a lot of proactive testing and experimentation that can be done to increase the resilience of organizations. And the collaboration between management and software development teams is a big contributor to this resilience thinking. I really do believe developers are key to securing future-proofing our value chains. So embracing security by design principles is definitely proactively is the first important step in enabling that. But also, you will hear in the presentation after me, creating software bill of materials, as tedious as that may sound, right? Mapping out the partners that you're working with, mapping out your products, and start preparing and doing so now is the first step you can take towards helping your organization become compliant with the Cyber Resilience Act. But also building cross-functional teams, as I highlighted, this may be with your cybersecurity team or this may be with your legal team, will also help demystify a little bit because unfortunately, all these regulations are often written by regulators for regulators, right? Even though they do involve data products and technology, it's often very challenging to actually implement some of these regulations. The intention is absolutely amazing, but when it comes to enforcement, there's always challenges involved. So this is why that cross-functional communication and teamwork is actually super important in demystifying what does this regulation actually mean for us. And in an effort to be ready for these conformity assessments, in an effort to be ready for auditing, conducting regular threat simulations or tests or exercises can hopefully be a part of your development exercise and journey as well. Now, in this half an hour or so, I didn't have time to talk about the human aspect of cybersecurity, right? But I have to mention this, and one of my favorite quotes from a brilliant security researcher highlights that as well. If you think technology can solve your security problems, then you do not understand the problems and you do not understand the technology. I think the Stuxnet example we talked about is a good case of that, right? I mean, having a digital weapon is one thing, but making sure it finds its way into a nuclear facility is something else. Or when you look into the #1 attack vector for ransomware incidents, you do see phishing emails, you do see stolen credentials as well. So still, human behavior is ultimately the #1 reason behind most of the damaging attacks that we see out there. And the reason is simple. Most threat actors go for the low-hanging fruit. It's easier to trick a human into doing something they're not supposed to do rather than finding and exploiting a vulnerability in a firewall, right? So not as you, as software developers, all the implications on security by design principles we talked about, that's one thing, but also as consumers of digital services, but also as employees of your organizations, we are at the outermost layer in the network of our organizations, and we are the #1 defense line when it comes to such attacks. So at the end of the day, as much as we embed our security by principles, we also have to be resilient in our cognition in terms of dealing with these cyber incidents. That is all I had for you today. I hope it was interesting, and I hope it was demystifying a little bit from a regulation perspective. We clearly don't expect any slowing down. On the contrary, we expect more regulations impacting our digitally enabled products out there. So approaching this from a design perspective and starting as early as possible in the journey is not only cheaper for organizations, but it's actually a much easier way to manage some of the risks and many other risks that we're not aware of yet to be dealt by organizations that we're working on. Thank you for your attention today.
Thank you, Öykü.